Good Sunday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for September the 24th. Today, we are reading together in 2 Kings chapter 9, which is going to introduce to us the character of Jehu. He has a lot to do here in these next couple of chapters. We're going to read all about him beginning today and also reading about him tomorrow as well. So let me get 2 Kings chapter 9 up on the screen for us. So we'll read along together here today. Thanks so much for taking time to begin your Sunday reading along with me here in 2 Kings chapter 9. Beginning in verse number 1. Remember, to catch us up from our text yesterday, where we went through a number of the kings of kings of a number of different places. We read some transitioning of the kings of Israel, also the transition of king of Aram, and also two transitions for the kingdom of Judah. Well, we see at the end, after King Ahaziah and King Joram of Judah and Israel respectively, after they fight against Hazael of Aram, we see that King Joram is injured and he has to go back to Jezreel, and then King Ahaziah is going to go to Jezreel to visit him as well. In the meantime, we're going to read a very rare occurrence within the history of Israel, in that one of the Israelite kings is actually going to be anointed. We don't see that often. I think actually this is the only time we're going to see the anointing of a king of Israel, as far as Israel being the northern tribes of God's people during the divided kingdom period. We're going to see someone anointed and told, you are going to be king, and that is going to be the man Jehu. So let's read here in 2 Kings chapter 9 and verse number 1. The text tells us that the prophet Elisha called one of the sons of the prophets and said, tuck your mantle under your belt, take this flask of oil with you, and go to Ramoth Gilead. When you get there, look for Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi. Go in and get him away from his colleagues, and take him to an upper room, or to an inner room. Then take the flask of oil, pour it on his head, and say, this is what Yahweh says, I anoint you king over Israel. Open the door and escape. Don't wait. So the young prophet went to Ramoth Gilead. When he arrived, the army commanders were sitting there. So he said, I have a message for you, commander. Jehu asked, for which one of us? And he answered, for you, commander. So Jehu got up and went into the house. The young prophet poured the oil on his head and said, this is what Yahweh, God of Israel, says. I anoint you king over Yahweh's people Israel. You are to strike down the house of your master Ahab, so that I may avenge the blood shed by the hands of Jezebel, the blood of my servants and the prophets of all the servants of Yahweh. The whole house of Ahab will perish, and I will wipe out all of Ahab's males, both slave and free, in Israel. I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, son of Ahijah. The dogs will eat Jezebel in the plot of land at Jezreel, and no one will bury her. Then the young prophet opened the door and escaped. When Jehu came out to his master's servants, they asked, is everything all right? Why did this crazy person come to you? Then he said to them, the sort and they're ranting. But they replied, that's a lie. Tell us. So Jehu said, talk to me about this and about that. And this is what Yahweh says, I anoint you king over Israel. Each man quickly took his garments and put it under Jehu on the bare steps. They blew the ram's horn and proclaimed, Jehu is king. Then Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. And Joram and all Israel had been at Ramoth Gilead on guard against King Hazael of Aram. But King Joram had returned to Jezreel to recover from the wounds that the Arameans had inflicted on him when he fought against Aram's King Hazael. Jehu said, if you commanders wish to make me king, then don't let anyone escape from the city to go about it in Jezreel. Then don't let anyone escape from the city to go tell about it in Jezreel. Jehu got into his chariots and went to Jezreel, since Joram was laid up there, and King Ahaziah of Judah had gone down to visit Joram. Now the watchman, excuse me, verse 17, was standing on the tower of Jezreel. He saw Jehu's mob approaching and shouted, I see a mob. Well, Joram responded, we'll choose a rider and send him to meet them and have him ask, do you come in peace? So a horseman went to meet Jehu and said, this is what the king asked. Do you come in peace? Jehu replied, what do you have to do with peace? Or what do you have to do with peace? Fall in behind me. The watchman reported the messenger reached them, but hasn't started back. So he sent out a second horseman who went to them and said, this is what the king asked. Do you come in peace? Jehu answered, what do you have to do with peace? Fall in behind me. Again, the watchman reported he reached them, but hasn't started back. Also, the driving is like that of Jehu, son of Nimshi. He drives like a madman. Well, get the chariot ready, Joram shouted, and they got it ready. Then King Joram of Israel and King Ahaziah of Judah set out, each in his own chariot, and met Jehu at the plot of land of Naboth the Jezreelites. When Joram saw Jehu, he asked, do you come in peace, Jehu? He answered, what peace can there be as long as there is so much prostitution and sorcery from your mother Jezebel? Joram turned around and fled, shouting at Ahaziah, it's treachery, Ahaziah. It's an attack. It's a surprise. Take off. Then Jehu drew his bow and shot Joram between the shoulders. The arrow went through his heart, and he slumped down in his chariots. Jehu said to Bigdar, his aide, pick him up and throw him on the plot of ground belonging to Naboth the Jezreelites. For remember, when you and I were riding side by side behind his father Ahab, and Yahweh uttered this pronouncement against him, as surely as I saw the blood of Naboth and the blood of his son yesterday, this is Yahweh's declaration, so will I repay you on this plot of lands. This is Yahweh's declaration. So now, according to the word of Yahweh, pick him up and throw him on the plot of lands. When King Ahaziah of Judah saw what was happening, he fled up the road toward Beth Hagan. Jehu pursued him, shouting, shoot him too. So they shot him in his chariot at Gur Pass near Iblaim. But he fled to Megiddo and died there. When his servants carried him to Jerusalem in a chariot and buried him, then his servants carried him to Jerusalem in a chariot and buried him in his ancestors' tomb in the city of David. It was in the 11th year of Joram, son of Ahab, that Ahaziah had become king over Judah. When Jehu came to Jezreel, Jezebel heard about it, so she painted her eyes, fixed her hair, and looked down from the window. As Jehu entered the city gate, she said, do you come in peace, Zimri, killer of your master? He looked up toward the window and said, who is on my side? Who? Two of the three eunuchs looked down at him, and he said, throw her down. So they threw her down, and some of her blood splattered on the wall and on the horses, and Jehu rode over her. Then he went in, ate, drank, and said, take care of this cursed woman and bury her, since she's a king's daughter. But when they went down to bury her, they did not find anything but the skull, the feet, and the hands. So they went back and told him, and he said, this fulfills the Yahweh's words that he spoke through his servant Elijah the Tishbites. In the plot of land at Jezreel, the dogs will eat Jezebel's flesh. Jezebel's corpse will be like manure on the surface of the ground in the plot of land at Jezreel, so that no one will be able to say, this is Jezebel. And that is the reading of 2 Kings chapter 9. Again, Jehu is going to make his appearance into the story, and it begins with Elisha sending out one of the sons of the prophets to go to Jehu and to anoint him as king over Israel, again, over the northern portion of the divided kingdom. And once he does that, he goes through the anointing process, goes there and tells him everything that he is going to do as the anointed king over Israel, that you are basically his instructions, his, what's the term I'm thinking of? His commands, I guess. His purpose in being king is that he is going to strike down the house of his master Ahab so that Yahweh could avenge the bloodshed, not just by Ahab, but also by the blood of Jezebel, the blood of his servants, the prophets, and all the servants of Yahweh, including, of course, Naboth would be somebody that would be included in that. So all of this is so that Ahab's house will be brought to judgment, and everyone needs to be taken out. This goes back to 1 Kings chapter 21 and verse 21, whether slave or free. If you belong to Ahab, if you're a male, you're going to be judged for the sins of your father. And really all it comes down to is that they're all evil as well. I can't think of anyone that came from the line of Ahab, after Ahab, that was anything really worthwhile, anyone who showed great faithfulness to Yahweh. So this is all the instructions, the orders that Jehu is given, that they need to all be destroyed and that they need to be wiped out. The house of Ahab does. So at this point, the son of the prophet goes, and his fellow servants, his fellow master servants, they're like, hey, what was that all about? Because you got to think about it. He's been anointed with oil, so he's going to have oil on his head, and they're thinking this is kind of strange. And he kind of blows it off initially. He says, oh, it's just the crazy people. You know how they are. They rant about this and that. But they're like, no, this is something you need to tell us. He says, fine. Tells them about it. Says, I've been anointed the king over Israel. And each man quickly, there was some urgency here. There was some passion in what they do, which is appropriate for Jehu. He's going to show himself to be a very passionate person, a very zealous person. They take their clothes and they put it under Jehu's steps, basically pulled out the red carpet for him, and they all proclaim Jehu is king. Well, why would they be so quick to do this? It seems that they are very dissatisfied with the reigning of Joram. Remember, one of the sons of Ahab, remember the first son, Ahaziah, I believe, is who the first son of Ahab was that was king. And then after that, his brother ends up taking over the throne of Israel. And both of these individuals, it's first it's Ahab, then it's Ahaziah, and then it's Joram. Again, they're all evil, wicked people, and his soldiers are fine with them being overtaken. So remember, they're in Jezreel, because of the conflict they had with Aram, and having suffered casualties and injuries, they've all taken off to Jezreel, and that's where they're kind of holed up at the moment. But Jehu is conspiring against Joram. So he gets in the chariots, him and his mob, as they're described, and they start making their way towards Jezreel. The watchman sees them and says, there's a mob coming. So Joram sends out him. He actually joins Jehu's forces, sends out a second messenger, joins Jehu's forces as well. And at this point, people are thinking, what's going on here? This is kind of crazy. But they recognize, just by the way he drove, that this was Jehu. I don't know. I guess at some point in the past, he had also taken a very quick chariot ride, and it's just kind of his style, the way he did things. But they recognize this was Jehu, son of Nimshi. He's a very zealous person. Jehu proves himself to be. So Joram and Ahaziah both go out to meet Jehu. And Joram, whenever he sees him, he says, hey, do you come in peace? It doesn't seem like they're really suspecting any sort of betrayal. It's probably just a normal way of greeting someone. Again, it's a little out of the ordinary. But Jehu says, well, what peace can there be when there's so much wicked and evilness around? What peace can there be when there is so much prostitution and sorcery from your mother Jezebel? Remember, she's still around. We see her end at the end of the story as well. Well, at this point, Joram realizes this is trouble, turns around to Ahaziah and says, hey, we need to get out of here. This is treachery. It's time for us to escape. So as Joram takes off away from Jehu, the text says that Jehu gets his bow, pulls it back, and fires it and shoots right in between Joram's shoulders. It even pierces his heart, and he slumps down in his chariot. He dies. Jehu's servant here, his aide, Bidkar is told to pick him up and throw him in the plot of ground belonging to Naboth. Again, this is all retribution for the sins of Ahab at this point. This is all bringing Yahweh's words to fulfillment. So he takes care of Joram. Well, then he turns around and he sees Ahaziah taking off as well. And Jehu says, you need to pursue him too. So they end up shooting him in the chariot as well. And he is killed and dragged off to Jerusalem and buried with his people in Jerusalem. It was in the 11th year of Joram, son of Ahab, that Ahaziah had become king over Judah. So they had some overlapping in their kingship, of course. But notice right here, Jehu takes care of two kings, both of the northern tribes and also the southern tribes, both wicked men. Neither one of them did what was right. If we remember some issues with, as I remember, there's the overlapping of the names too, which adds just further confusion. But at the end of the day, both these kings, neither one of them godly, neither one of them were worshipers of Yahweh in the proper sense, and they did not trust him, they did not obey him, they were leading their people in sin. So they're both judged here by Jehu in this chapter. But there is one more loose end that needs to be tied up, and that is concerning Jezebel. Jezebel hears about all this. She hears about what takes place. Her second son has been killed as well. So she puts paint on her eyes, fixes her hair, looks down from the window. She sees Jehu, and she says to him, "Do you come in peace, Zimri, killer of your master?" Why would she call him Zimri? Isn't his name Jehu? Well, we remember that Zimri was also a rebel of some sorts. He had his own coup. He is the man who killed Baasha and reigned as king over Israel for only 7 days. Before it would be Jezebel's father-in-law Omri kills him. So this is just her way of saying, "Hey, is that you, Benedict Arnold?" basically. And Jehu calls up to the window and he says, "Hey, whoever's up there, is anyone on my side? If you are, who is it?" So 2 or 3 eunuchs look down at him, and he says, "Hey, take her and toss her out the window, throw her down." And that's what they do. They toss her down, and some of the blood even splatters. You just imagine a body falling from that height, landing straight on the ground. It would be a pretty gruesome scene. And Jehu cares nothing for Jezebel, so much so that he even rides over her with his horse, tramples her corpse. That's enough work for a day. So he goes up, gets some food and some drink, ends up sending his servants down to collect her so that she can, be buried like she needs to be. And they say, "Well, there's not much left over. There's just the skull, there's some feet, there's some hands." And again, this is Yahweh's word being fulfilled that he spoke to Elijah in the plot of land at Jezreel. The dogs will eat Jezebel's flesh, and that is traced back to 2 Kings chapter 21 as well, verse 23 specifically. So at the end of the day, what we have here in chapter 9 of 2 Kings is Jehu. Jehu is rendering out retribution against the enemies of Yahweh, specifically the household of Ahab. He brings them to judgment for all their sins, and now they are wiped out. And Jehu, well, actually, I shouldn't say that. They're not wiped out yet. There's still some work for Jehu to do, and we're going to see that picking up tomorrow in chapter 10. Whenever I just think about everything that took place within this chapter, I see zeal. Jehu is one of the most zealous men I think we can see within the book of 2 Kings. We're going to notice tomorrow that he's not a perfect king at all, but for the commands that God gave him within this chapter, he was very jealous to fulfill them. Do we have that type of zeal? Obviously, we're not going to go out and wipe out wicked kings and render judgment in this way against God's enemies, but we should be zealous for God's will in our lives. We should have energy toward it. We should have passion for it, and we should commit great effort to do as God would have us to do. We can certainly learn that from Jehu within this particular chapter. If you have any questions or comments about this text, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. I know everyone's excited for the worship assemblies we'll be having in a little bit. So obviously Katie and I are out of town today. I'm really excited for the treat that y'all are going to be able to enjoy and benefit from as Dave Clark presents the lesson today in the worship assembly. I know that you'll be blessed by it. Thanks again for tuning in today, everyone. We'll be back at it again tomorrow, reading together from 2 Kings chapter 10. Hope to see you then. Take care and God bless.